Going to be an apologist for the corrupt things that have happened in the history of our country. I'm going to be an advocate to stomp out corruption. We need people that are going to go back to Washington and represent individuals, not big corporations, not lobbyists, not make excuses for them. We need someone that's going to be proactive. And I feel that we need to stop this revolving door, which means we need to implement at least a 2 to 5 year ban between people working in lobbying firms and in congressional offices. We need to have better transparency. We need to have bans on certain types of gifts. These are all things that Common Cause has advocated for. I agree with Common Cause. My opponent does not. It is important for us to not make apologies for the corruption in Washington. It's important for us to be proactive and go back there and stomp it out.
Let's just go back to this. I'll just stay on this for just one more round if we could. Your answer, Representative Cannon, intrigued me. Is corruption today, as it exists, more nefarious, more systematic, more institutionalized than what it has been in the past with the power that political parties have been able to wield?
Would you like me to go first?
Yeah, you first. And then
I think that the world evolves, the world changes, and I believe in the highest standards possible. And I don't think that I can be criticized for that or for being aggressive about that. But the world has changed, and I will tell you that Business Week ran a cover story about losing control of politics to moneyed interests. And then they ran a piece in the last page, their editorial piece, and the last paragraph was, unless Americans assert themselves and make many small contributions, we will lose our political system to moneyed interests. If you look at the rate at which money has gone into politics, it's astonishing. It's increasing at a radical rate. George Will said the other night that you need $60 million in January of 2008 to run a campaign for the presidency. $60 million to get started is probably a $200 million process. That has changed things, and America needs to wake up and start getting involved in politics with their own pocketbooks.
Yeah,
yes.
1 minute for Mr. Burridge.
It's important for us to have standards in our society. And it's quite true that money is a huge influence in politics. The Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002 has made it even more difficult for challengers to take on opponents because it basically cut off many of the sources of funding for challenger candidates. I believe that the constitutional founders of this country wanted to have high turnover in the House of Representatives. That's why we have 2-year terms. But this money peddling, this incumbency protection is more and more insulating our members of Congress from the people of the United States. It's having a corrosive influence, and it's important to have people that are going to go back and fight for ethics reform and fight for campaign finance reform and do the things so that the people have a voice. Because the impact of that is that more and more those that have money, those that have huge corporate interests, get the legislation passed. There are anti-consumer protection laws. This Congress gutted the bankruptcy law. This Congress passed a huge prescription drug benefit that's anti-competitive. And all these things are hurting human beings. I will stand up for human beings, and I'll fight against corruption in Washington.
I've got to let the panelists just indulge me for one more second here, if they could, on one last follow-up on this, and I promise we'll move on. The Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, I believe you voted against it, right?
It actually was a Democratic
yeah, but the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act,
and there
right?
were some Republicans who defected,
right,
but yes, I voted against that.
Right, but the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act actually, as we've done the analyses, have increased the individual contributions that come from individuals, the percentage of contributions that, or the amount of money coming from individual contributions has increased because of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. So is that consistent with what you're saying? And then we'll ask Mr. Burridge here why he would have voted against the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. How would that have hurt challengers? So first, this issue of individual contributors, and second, we'll go to Mr.
I think we agree on the effect of what you're calling bipartisan, but which is really very few Republicans supporting campaign finance reform, which I thought was unconstitutional and shouldn't have been there. If to the degree there's an increase, and I haven't seen your study, but an increase in individual contributions, I suspect that relates to the fact that you have a whole bunch of money being poured into these 527s.
No. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's individual contributions, hard money, federal contributions to federal
as a
candidates.
percentage of money that goes, say, as opposed to PAC money.
Exactly.
Yeah, so what I think has happened is that PAC money that would have gone into PACs, is now being taken by corporations and being put into 527s, and so you're going to have an increase in PAC money, but a bigger increase in individual contributions. Yeah, but related to the underside of this all, which is these uncontrolled 527s.
Right.
The problem in the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act is the restraints it has on coordination between candidates and state parties and 527s. Because what it does is those that are being challengers in a race are basically on their own. The caps make it difficult for challenger candidates, and there are some problems with it with regard to the constitutionality of it. I'm in favor of public financed elections. We spent $60 billion on the oil companies alone this year in subsidies. The earmarks are outrageous. The amount of money that it would cost to help challenger candidates in this country is very small compared to the amounts of money that are going to earmarks and the corruption in Congress right now.
Thank you for indulging me on those questions. Patrick?
I'd like to hear the candidates' thoughts on immigration, one of the major issues of this campaign. Some estimates state that there are 11 to 13 million illegal aliens residing currently in the United States. Representative Cannon, recently you put together a task force to look into this issue. What were the task force findings, and what do you plan on implementing in Congress, given the opportunity? And Mr. Burridge, do you agree first with the findings of the task force, and what parts would you support?
And that question goes first to Mr. Burridge and then to Representative Cannon.
Sure. Well, I'm not quite familiar with the exact findings of the task force, but I can tell you exactly what my position is on immigration. There is a huge strain on our societies right now because of the unregulated commerce that's coming over our border in the form of labor. We need to have clear reform when it comes to this area. This is affecting our social costs in the areas of police, in the areas of education and health care, and the taxpayers are being caused to foot the bill. I stand for enforcement of our laws through the businesses first. They're the ones causing the people coming into our communities. They're getting cheap labor. It's driving American workers' wages down, and at the same time passing social costs on to the rest of us. We need to have a notice period whereby employers can get into compliance, and then strict enforcement. It's much like the problem we had with child labor 100 years ago. When you enforce the businesses, then we are able to regulate this problem in a better manner. And hopefully, if I'm elected to Congress, I will fight for comprehensive immigration reform.
Representative Cannon?
Thank you. As we looked at this issue, and having talked to thousands, literally, of people about the issue, the first thing you have to do is get control of your borders. Now, we've taken great steps in that direction, and despite all the news to the contrary, we actually have funded the building of the fence along the border, and that's going apace. The second thing you need to do is have internal enforcement, and part of that is currently businesses hire people who have documents that are probably false. You can't beat those businesses up until you give them a way to understand who is here legally, so they don't invest in people that are not appropriately here. And so you have to have a system that allows business to know who they're hiring. And when that happens, then it's appropriate to prosecute businesses who don't stick with the program. And then you need to have a way to take care of the people that are here now illegally, and they have to pay a penalty, and they have to leave the country, I think, to get, I believe, and most people believe, to get a visa. And then in the future, so that you don't have this problem of illegal people streaming in to get jobs, you need to have a way to feed the jobs that we have available in America. In Utah, we're at virtual no unemployment, and we need to maintain a robust economy by allowing people to come in.
Thank you. Professor Dessart?
Well, let's talk about the big issue of the year, and that's the war in Iraq. It's on the minds of a lot of the voters this year. What is your assessment of the way things are going in Iraq, and what should our policy be for the near future regarding our involvement?
Representative Cannon.
Thank you. I had the opportunity recently to speak with a senior retired officer from the Special Forces, and he's a family friend, and we had a very pleasant conversation. We got talking about Iraq, and he was enraged, and he got going, and he talked about all the problems in Iraq, and I was agreeing with him. And finally he said, and the only thing worse than what we're doing in Iraq would be to pull out. And so the answer is we have to improve what we're doing. Presumably, if the Democrats take over, if we get a Democratic president next cycle, we won't cut and run. We'll figure out how to do it better, and frankly, we're doing that today. Now, it's a frustrating, irritating thing. I think most Americans are deeply concerned. They ought to think about this one startling fact. If any of us had been asked after 9/11 when we thought the next attack would occur, none of us would have suggested that it would be beyond this point. We all would have thought, I thought, and many of us thought, that we would have had other attacks in America since then and now.